It's time to start drafting Magic's latest set with us returning to Theros. And this is a set I would say is the holiest one we've seen all year. But we don't have time for jokes and bad puns, we've got to figure out what is happening and what is good and not so good about the set. To start, the new mechanic is Escape, where the card can be cast from the graveyard for the stated cost and exiling a stated number of other cards in our graveyard. To clarify how this works, yes, timing rules still apply, meaning creatures can only be cast when you could normally cast creatures, but also keep in mind that you can escape something out multiple times as long as you can pay that escape cost. And then returning is Constellation, which does something when an enchantment enters the battlefield, including enchantment creatures. Great. A point I want to make when drafting this set is that a focus of ours should be to maximize the synergy and value that exists in the color pairing we end up in. So I will touch on the highlights of what is important, as well as mention the higher synergy cards and rares in each color pairing. Yes, there are some times we may end up in a monocolor deck, and I'll touch on that later, but my assumption is we will end up in at least two colors 99% of the time. Also, there are cards that are good, independent of the color pairing we're talking about, so I probably won't show a card like Final Death or Eat to Extinction in every color pairing these work with, because they are simply some of the best removal options in black and belong in your deck regardless. Now onto the color pairings, which in this set all 10 work, and all 10 have that Signpost Gold card jumping in with the aggro color pairings first. With red-white, it is Heroic Heroes. Our draft game plan is to get on the board, apply pressure early, which means we have to have a low curve, and use the pseudo-heroic ability to pump up all of our creatures, which means combat tricks are a must as well. Remember, a quick tell is if hero or heroes is in the name of the card, it will have this ability where if you target it with a spell, all creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Look to white and red for the heroic creatures, token generation, and some combat tricks. White has more removal options, red has those direct damage and instant speed plays, and some rares that can pull us in this direction are certainly Elspeth, as white is the color that really helps us go wide. Heliod is just good in all white color pairings, and Perforos will require us to lean heavier into red to make him a creature. And we rarely want to actually sneak attack creatures out since we lose them at the end of the turn, which is not great for limited. Keep an eye out for most other red and white rares, which are always good additions and high value creatures to help keep our opponent from stabilizing. A main concern here is our top end can feel rather weak, and with how much instant speed interaction there is, when we play something like one of the red enchantments we have, it can lead to us getting blown out by an instant speed removal spell from our opponent. The next aggro pairing is red-black, and self-sacrifice synergies are the game plan here. We want to see stuff die and even be sacrificed so we can remain in control of the game. A low curve is important here as well, as we can certainly make use of those weaker creatures later on. Red has more of the sacrifice enabling creatures, but black does bring a couple enablers as well, with one of them being a rare in Woe Strider. Other rares are some of the best, like Croaks of the Friendly Titan, and then some of the worst, like Allure of the Unknown. But we also should keep an eye out for our Demon Shepherd Friend and the Akroan War, which also shows that yeah, we get sagas back in this set. I like this color pairing a bit more than white-red because black brings with it so much removal and more flexibility to get ahead on board or on cards in the mid to late game. My top concern here is in general, self-sacrificing cards can be tough to balance in limited because in sealed or draft games we often want to win through card advantage. So if we're sacrificing a creature of ours, it should be for a reason and providing us more value than just, for example, pinging our opponent for one and gaining one life like Lampet of Death's Vigil does. The ideal way to get around that is getting free creatures like we can with Annex and Nightmare Shepherd, so we're not having to sacrifice meaningful creatures but are actually maximizing the potential of something like a 1/1 Satyr token. Then I have green-white also as an aggro color pairing in this set because it's the Army of Auras, and it's a color pair where we want to make sure we have earlier plays to make them bigger and far more threatening than our opponent can handle. A low curve here is important because we never want to be in the position of having enchantments in our hand and no creatures to put them on. Both colors also bring some pretty potent auras as well, with Commanding Presence, Mantle of the Wolf, Warbriar Blessing, Setessan Training, and Indomitable Will. There's also white's best common, which is removal in the form of an aura with Dreadful Apathy. In the set we get multiple options that make this enchantment-based strategy less risky as well. What I mean by that is this strategy is often an all-in, high-risk, high-reward game plan where we are investing multiple cards into one creature. But if that creature gets removed, we end up in a pretty big hole getting 2 for 1 or worse. But cards like Siona, our Planeswalker Calyx, and Heliod's Pilgrim all help us get that aura enchantment into our hand as a bonus. These should be highly valued when drafting this color pair. My top concern with white-green still remains this color pairing needs to draw a decent balance of creatures and auras. Too many of either card type can leave us in a tough spot, so prioritizing those creatures that fetch us or dig for an aura are super important, as is having enough interaction and removal for evasive creatures or bombs on the other side of the board. And the last color pairing I view as more aggro than anything else is blue-red, and the your turn is my turn game plan. We want to draft the flash cards and instant speed interaction like Omen of the Forge and counterspells, But I have this game plan as more aggro because just playing stuff at instant speed isn't inherently strong enough to win us the game. What makes it stronger is the bonus and the synergy we get from cards like Dreamstalker Manticore, Wavebreak Hippocamp, and Stinging Lionfish. We just flash in a 2/2 flyer, that's fine, but then being able to ping something, or draw a card, or tapping down a creature to be able to safely attack for more damage is far more impactful and how we really get ahead in this color pair. Our rare here, Dalichos, is fine, but I don't rate him very high in this set and would not consider it a bomb by any means. A dream combo though is Wavebreak Hippocamp and Nadir Kraken. Draw more cards, grow your Kraken, and get more tokens. Thrix is definitely a bomb as well, and Kiora Best the Sea God is probably the most obnoxious mythic in the set that says I win the game when it resolves. The weakness to this color pairing is you need those high synergy cards to stick around. If they get removed, you can fall behind as your creatures may have a harder time standing up to or keeping up with bigger threats. Your decision making will probably be tested an above average amount when playing this color combo as well. Now on to more of the mid-range decks, and the first one I have is Black-White Reanimation. The simplest way to draft these colors is to focus on what they do best, and that's removing everything. Seriously, white and black has a ton of removal. Then maybe we're able to poke in for some damage, but if not, we have some decent escape options and a few tricks up our sleeve to bring back our creatures with some graveyard hate there to make sure our opponents cannot escape death. Kunaros shuts everything off, which we don't mind because this guy can be hard to deal with. Treacherous Blessing is a play to get ahead on cards, and Ephemia helps us chew up enchantments and turn them into zombies. My top concern here is falling behind on board and then not being able to catch up with just our creatures alone. So if we can't find enough removal, hopefully we can draft some big bomby creatures and protect those and recur them enough to close out the game. Then we're into red-green, which power 4 is the goal, and our synergy here is found in those cards that care about power 4 or greater to either grow or get us access to more cards. Curving out here is important as well, but the early game feels more like setup time. We want to ramp or wall up the ground, and then once we hit the mid-game, we really start rolling and are hopefully unstoppable. There's also some potent rares in this set, like our new god in the set, Clothis, the first Aroan Games, and Ox of Agones. I also want to explain that Nessian Boar is one of, if not the highest risk, highest reward cards in the set. It can certainly do some powerful things, being a 10/6 for only 5 mana, but our opponent can block with a bunch of creatures, draw a bunch of cards, then they use some instant speed removal on it, we're now behind on cards, they didn't lose any of their blockers, and we're in a huge hole. But I think this is the best color pairing for it, since hopefully we've got some good sized bodies next to it to get in for plenty of damage while Nessian Boar draws all the blockers towards itself. My top concern when drafting these colors is getting enough removal and interaction into our build. There's a lot of removal in this set, so we also need to know that just playing 1 or 2 big bodies probably isn't enough to win. And lastly, in red-green, I always want to have some trample as well to help get our big bodies past the chump blockers and prevent the board from stalling out. Next up, we have blue-black and self-mill. Ashiok is a win condition all their own. Our other gold card in Devourer of Memory can become unblockable when we get cards in the graveyard. And Atris is easily one of my favorite cards in the set, if for no other reason than the mind games they bring to your opponent. There isn't a lot of self-mill that I consider good in the set, although Mire Triton is great at any point in the game. Our key here is to draft good, evasive, and high-value creatures, play a lot of disruption, and find clever ways to win through evasion or by taking advantage of the self-mill and escape cards we can bring back. With that said though, that's certainly a risk that if they exile our creatures, we can be left behind on board, and I also think this color pairing will test your decision-making skills, which means it may take a couple trial runs with it to really get a good feel for what works and doesn't work with these 2 colors in the set. But I do find its top end and ability to find a way to win is as good as any. Then we have black-green, and we're all about escape here. Acolyte of Affliction can get a permanent back into our hand without having to escape it, but Pelokrunos wants to escape so it can come into play with 12 1/1 counters on it. That's kind of a big deal. We have access to drafting good removal, good early and mid-game creatures to fill up our graveyard, and access to the most amount of creatures with escape. I like this color pairing as well because I find the creatures generally efficient. And I find this color pairing more powerful than I have in other recent sets because of the card draw and removal options green offers. My top concern though is graveyard hate can hit us hard if we mill something or trade something away that we plan to get back. If they have a way to exile cards in our graveyard, we can end up in a place where we can no longer win the race, or we lose our only options to deal with their bombs or their annoying flyers, and then we're really in some trouble. Next up is blue-green, and it's all about that constellation effect. This color pairing will be leaning on early game plays and mid game plays to add value throughout, but we also have a Titan who can just take over the game as well. The synergy and bonus value from the constellation effect is what makes this color pair so strong. We can make any creature a threat, give them evasion, or draw us cards. If we get this kind of setup, we can essentially be undeniable, because when blue and green pair up, powerful things happen. Sometimes far too powerful, but we won't go there. Focus on drafting high-value early game plays, look for rares that get out of hand quick, and lean on the disruption blue offers us to get our win conditions set up and then protected. We can win with evasion, or having the biggest creatures trample over, or play around nifty combos like using Shimmerwing Chimera to bounce the omens and get us ahead on land or card draw. My concern here though is also similar to red-blue, where we can set up, build up all those high synergy constellation effects, but then lose them or fall flat by not finding our combo pieces or creatures to take advantage of it. And of course, a good curve here is important as well to make sure we don't fall too far behind in the early game and can actually make use of our enchantment and enchantment creatures. And the last color pair to discuss is blue-white flyers. And if you get the gold cards, this combo can be unbelievably powerful simply because of the card draw. If I haven't said it enough already, card draw and card advantage wins you games in limited. And this is the color combo to do just that. We can go really aggro with flyers and combat tricks, or we can play the grindy game, winning with just 1 or 2 creatures poking in. Or just play massive bomby creatures flying in as well, but we also have the removal we need for any threat, and Disruption of Blue keeps the skies clear. However, this combo can be fairly reliant on finding and then protecting those high-flying flyer cards. So a risk for us is losing a main threat and then being stabilized against where our small flyers either can't keep up or we lose the race to far bigger bodies. Another big concern is getting greedy, where you're ahead on board and on cards and then you just play out your hand, leaving your creatures exposed to removal. Instead, keep up that counterspell or hold off and play a flash option instead. It may not be as efficient or as powerful, but it's far more effective in maintaining control of the board. Now that's all the 2-color options. There are options to also splash in a third. Green gives us a couple mana fixers. Altar of the Pantheon is a great option to fix our mana as well as increase our devotion. Traveler's Amulet helps us search for a basic land. The Scry land cycle has been completed with this set. And if you want my take on it, I often find myself splashing a third color to get to my bombs because this set does feel pretty bomb heavy. And if I'm fortunate enough to pull a big bomb or a mythic rare, I want to try and incorporate it into my deck. However, when we look at the god creatures, I don't always want to splash these cards, but I am comfortable splashing Heliod and Erebos. In general, I think especially if you're in green, splashing a third color is completely reasonable, so don't shy away from it and lean into the artifacts a bit more if you need to find those fixing options. Now onto the monocolored options, and I'll break this down in 2 different ways. First is drafting with humans, whether it's in paper or on MTGO. If that's the case, monocolored I find far less likely to pull off. Mono black is probably your best bet, where you're not losing much in the way of access to removal and bomby creatures, and it works really well if you're fortunate enough to end up with Erebos, Underworld Dreams, Tamaret, and of course a Gary or 2. Mono white can work as well if the aggro plan comes together, go wide, use heroic creatures and combat tricks to run over your opponent with a fair bit of removal as well to deal with big solo creatures from your opponent. With regards to the other 3, I don't think they're generally very strong and can't stand on their own as consistently as white and black can. Though not impossible, I found they lead you down a much harder road to victory. Now I could certainly be convinced I'm wrong with green and even red, but blue definitely feels the weakest from a limited perspective. But if you pull any of these off, let me know how it ends up for you down in the comments. Now, if we're talking about drafting on Arena, it can be a far different environment and strategy. On Arena, we draft with bots. Drafting with bots, I just don't like, but it's all we got at the moment. And as the set's released, Wizards will mess with the bots and how they rank the pick order cards. It's not uncommon for players to force a game plan that is known to be undervalued by the bots and build the same type of deck over and over. It can be frustrating, and though I could rant about it with the best of them, what we can take away from this is the more you play, the more you'll start to realize what the more common matchups are. Mono white seems to be the go-to at the start of the season, and while I expect it to be addressed in a future patch, monocolored decks are more likely to show up, again because the bots are probably undervaluing certain cards. When you see them, you need to know it's usually banking on full-out aggro, and you'll want to recall our earlier draft tips to have a good curve and those removal exile options for the bombs they probably have. But let's end on a fun note and talk about some awesome combos you can play no matter where you're drafting. Mogus's Favor and Hateful Eidolon is a great way to remove those 1 toughness creatures on our opponent's side of the board and draw us cards. Wrap in Flames is great because it targets multiple creatures, which means we can get around multiple blockers or trigger Heroic multiple times on our creatures. And probably the best combo card is Flicker of Fate, and it's very powerful with Dreadful Apathy. In case you're not aware, it is a fantastic combo where you can activate Dreadful Apathy, and before it resolves, you can cast Flicker of Fate on Dreadful Apathy, return it into play on another creature, and then that first activation resolves, exiling that initially equipped creature. Flicker of Fate also works great with Erois' Blessing to get it back into play and blow up another creature, or fight a creature. Now those aren't all the combos out there, but let me know which ones are your favorites, or what favorite plays you've made with something like this down in the comments. Remember, each draft experience is unique, so the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get and the better you'll become with that set, as well as improving your approach to limited gameplay in general. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and someone will be there to help you out. Thank you to Card Kingdom for sponsoring the channel. Use my affiliate link to pick up a booster box to draft with your buddies, or buy the singles you want to build that deck or add to your collection. Thank you to my patrons for being genuinely awesome people, and of course just being awesome drafters because, this is what happens when you become a patron. And to you for watching. Share this around if you found it helpful, hit the like button to help it get noticed, and we'll see you in the next video, and good luck in those drafts.